Dear friends, you are welcome to this edition of Beyond Africa. In this special edition of Beyond Africa, we are reviewing the reasons for which Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso withdrew from the ECOWAS. Is it sustainable? Was that decision meant to protect the people of ECOWAS? Was that decision meant to threaten ECOWAS? Or what was that decision meant to send a message to people who are not part of ECOWAS, but pull the strings from behind? In this edition, we receive EK, that is Ngalim Bernard, who is an AU and ECOWAS analyst. He's followed the situation, he's studied ECOWAS for a long time, and he has an understanding of the situation. Stay tuned and listen to him as he shares his insights, which are very important for us to understand the situation in West Africa and in Africa in general as we democratize and move forward with our development in Africa. Emmanuel, thank you so much for coming to the program today.
Hi, good morning. Oh, sorry, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to talk to you. And you've been doing a lot of work on the AU and ECOWAS, understanding their policies, understanding their implementation, and also in this challenging moments in ECOWAS, in the ECOWAS sub-region, it appears that the situation may get worse. What is your take on the future of ECOWAS, especially with the current withdrawals from the bloc by these three countries?
Sorry, I missed that last bit. I think just that last ending, please. Can you?
It's your take on the effects of these withdrawals by Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali from the ECOWAS bloc.
So the implications.
Yes, the implications.
What are the implications?
Yeah, the implications. Yeah.
Okay. So here are three countries: Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are countries that have been part of ECOWAS, if you can believe, since 1975. So these are three countries that have been part of a regional bloc for 49 good years. Any institution that has turned 20 or even 30, let alone 50, is an institution that has covered a lot of mileage, and therefore is an institution that must continue, of course, as we have seen with the United Nations, as we have seen with the African Union. An organization that has spent almost 50 years keeping the peace in the sub-region and trying to help promote democracy, is an organization that I think as Africans we should all try to protect. I see the latest implications moved by these three Sahel countries as a kind of fragmentation or disintegration of the ECOWAS integration project, because these are three key countries in the Sahel. And without 2011, when Gaddafi was killed by NATO troops and the Sahel opened up, we probably might not have had this. But you see, if we believe that everything happens for a reason, then this was a time that this was going to happen for a reason, for ECOWAS to get a little bit more serious and identify some of its strengths and its weaknesses. ECOWAS has done a lot of good work. We see what it did in 1990 to 97 in Liberia and ECOMOG. We've seen it intervening in the Gambia in 2017, and it's putting boots on the ground in different over the past 49 years. However, what has probably caused ECOWAS a large headache has been the existence of the Sahel. Before Gaddafi was, let me say, in many ways killed by NATO troops in 2011, there was no issue of the Sahel. The Sahel had always been there. But Gaddafi had offered a buffer, had kind of always ensured that he was a buffer in helping the Sahel region from exploding, or in this case, imploding. But what we saw is that once the Sahel, which is the strip between North Africa and West Africa, opened up, what we saw then was an ungoverned area being more ungovernable, not protected, a lot of gun smuggling, human trafficking. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in 2013 called the Sahel area an area where there were 6 major crimes happening, including human trafficking, gun trafficking, organ harvesting, and so on. And what we saw from 2011 was a lot of which ECOWAS probably was not able to contain, because even though these 3 countries were the Sahel, and in ECOWAS and then in WEMWA, which is the Francophone West African countries, what we didn't also see was the fact that ECOWAS did not have a Sahel strategy, largely obviously because it didn't anticipate that the Sahel would explode or implode like this. So there was no Sahel strategy. So we saw the United Nations developing one in 2016. We saw the African Union trying to come up with one. We saw the EU coming up with a Sahel strategy. But ECOWAS, most closest to the fire in the kitchen, did not have a Sahel strategy.
Yeah, does this explain why the 3 countries withdrawing actually said ECOWAS is not helping them in the fight against terrorism?
I think it could be one of the reasons, because let me just give you a quick overview of the landscape. In 2014, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime helped set up the G5 Sahel group, which was populated by these 3 countries, plus Chad, and then Mauritania. The G5 Sahel group has largely collapsed now. These 3 countries have withdrawn. It's just left with Chad and Mauritania. I think there's an attempt to resuscitate it because the G5 Sahel has institutions. But the very fact that these 3 countries have withdrawn from the G5 Sahel countries, leaving just 2 countries in the G5 Sahel group, an institution that was largely helped set up by the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, speaks to, for me, a stubbornness by these 3 countries about doing what they want to do. Stubbornness because of this junta who want to make a point and who want to grandstand and say that we know what we are doing. We want to make the case for these 3 countries. Hence the fact that we now know that they've set up this grouping of Alliance of Sahel States. But you see, the Sahel took everyone by surprise. I think, in retrospect, if we were to go back, if Gaddafi had not been killed by NATO troops in 2011, we probably might not be in this situation that we're in. We kind of took everything by. I think ECOWAS and the countries around got a bit complacent that the Sahel was never going to be a problem because it was under wraps by people like Gaddafi and other stakeholders. But the fact that even the EU and the United Nations were now trying to look for a Sahel strategy spoke to the fact that they didn't even have one in the first place. One example is the fact that in the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel, which is based in Dakar, is the United Nations Peace Building Office. Okay, it was set up by the Secretary General, the ESWA Secretary General, Kofi Annan, as a response to offering good dialogue and peace in the sub-region around ECOWAS. And this was around 2001. Now, it became one of the first UN peacekeeping offices on the continent. So it was a way of the United Nations acting as one in West Africa, together with West Africa and so on. Now, when it was set up in 2001, it was a United Nations Office for West Africa. By 2015, 2016, an existing structure called the Office for Sahel, the Office for the Sahel, which was a UN agency, had collapsed and joined the United Nations Office for West Africa to become UNOWAS. So what we now know as United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel, since 2016, is a product of the United Nations deciding that the Sahel, the Office of the Sahel, which had an executive director, had to be collapsed and brought into the United Nations Office for West Africa, based in Dakar. So from 2016, we started having the United Nations Office for West Africa and the Sahel responding to West Africa as ECOWAS and the Sahel. So it started looking, it brought the issue of the Sahel into its portfolio. I started looking at issues around the Sahel a lot more concretely. I think the very fact that this happened in 2015 and 2016, just 5 years after Gaddafi was killed, and it was around the same time that the United Nations itself was developing a Sahel strategy. I know this because at the time I was producing news on radio, and we broke down the Sahel strategy to series. 2016 was when the Sahel strategy by the United Nations came out, and it was a good overview of what the Sahel was, an ungoverned place where there was a lot of crime, a lot of problems, but it needed to be fixed. And the United Nations had the capacity to do that, but it also needed to work in concert with organizations like ECOWAS to make sure that it worked well. So the Sahel has, in many ways, in retrospect, for me, has taken the ECOWAS, AU, United Nations, and many of the stakeholders, even the French, have taken them all by surprise. And so they've had to play catch up to quickly identifying solutions which they think would help respond. But the response has probably been devoid of looking at good governance. Some of the stakeholders place premium on looking more at security responses rather than looking at good governance. So you had good governance, on the back foot, whereas ECOWAS had been promoting good governance for a long time in West Africa. But because of the Sahel, and with 3 countries largely coming from the Sahel, they now realized that there was a deficit of good governance, which had been present in most of the ECOWAS countries, but which now was largely absent. This good governance was now largely absent in these 3 countries, and it exposed them to even more problems, including terrorism.
Thank you so much for this background information, which is necessary to set the basis for understanding what is happening in the Sahel. It's important also to know that you have highlighted the United Nations strategy for the Sahel, which is meant to kind of bring peace and stabilize and kick out the jihadists or the terrorists. But then it comes down to the question of the people on the streets of Gao, the people on the streets of Niamey. Are they aware of these strategies that the United Nations is putting into place to protect them against terrorist attacks? Because as you mentioned, there is a difference between good governance and the fight against security, and at times they clash. Sometimes the clash leads to violation of human rights. Sometimes security must be cleared off for people to start enjoying peaceful life. So at what point does the United Nations strategy for the Sahel kind of conflict with what the people in the regions feel for themselves?
That's a very good question, and it points down to something which I'm greatly concerned about as someone who is in communications. As someone who does communications for some stakeholders, including the African Union's Africa Peer Review Mechanism, for example, which is in the business of promoting good governance on the continent, I can tell you that without communicating or making visible the outputs or the products of some of these strategies, like the United Nations Sahel strategy, the AU strategy, ECOWAS strategy, I'm breaking it down to the people for them to understand and get their buy-in, including bringing in the buy-in of the media. You are very rarely ever going to get the buy-in of the people, let alone the government. Sometimes what you may find is that if you are smart enough and you do sensitization stakeholder forums, you bring civil society, these forums largely can happen where with the presence of government officials, and so they get to know what is going on. But I don't know the extent to which the Sahel strategy of the UN was popularized for ordinary people, or any of the other Sahel strategies were popularized. So to be honest with you, even the G5 Sahel group, other than analysts like us who can be a bit nerdy watching some of these developments, I don't know the extent to which even people in the G5 Sahel zone felt that they were part of a new grouping that was going to help protect them and offer them security and good governance and jobs and so on and so forth. So for me, these are some of the challenges that come with these regional and continental institutions and international institutions, that they come out with a lot of ideas and strategies, but the extent to which they popularize it is always very limited. And the AU suffers a lot from it. They do a lot of very good work, but they don't popularize some of their work. And before you know it, people don't buy into it. And you find that their policies are now lying fallow somewhere, gathering dust because someone, maybe there have not been sufficient communication around that policy. So yeah, you're right. It's a very important thing. And I want to believe this is an important takeaway that we get going out of this interview, that communication on some of these issues, good governance, anti-corruption, security, everything ends and starts with communication. If you want to get a buy-in of the people, you must do sensitization stakeholder forums, get their buy-in into these things. The absence of a civil society in the Francophone parts of West Africa has also been one of the challenges and one of the reasons why we have not had a lot of buy-in. I think Anglophone West Africa does media sensitization and stakeholder engagement probably a lot more smartly than in Francophone West Africa, where there's a bit of more of a deficit of the civil society. So you will find that civil society, there are lots of forums all over the place in Ghana, Nigeria, Liberia, but less so in the Francophone West African countries. And that's a problem.
Before we come back to the substance of the conversation, do you know what accounts for the lower presence of civil society organizations in Francophone Africa? That is, the point you make sounds very true to me because I work in civil society, and the presence is actually low in Francophone Africa. What explains that disparity between Francophone Africa and Anglophone Africa when it comes to civil society presence?
I want to believe that it's historical, that the African countries that were colonized by the British were given a lot more room to operate once the British left. You find that in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and so on and so forth. They had a bit more leeway to act, and I think the engagement, even with their former colonial masters, now became one where even if they were trying to, have one over us and, making it a power play, they were still opening up the space in their former colonizers. So in Ghana and Nigeria, you would find them still engaging us more at the level of partnership and encouraging more civil society organizations to grow. You also found that there was more funding available for civil society groups to operate. So obviously, a lot more civil society organizations would be established to be able to take advantage of that funding to create more inclusive and libertarian spaces and so on. Contrast that with Francophone West Africa, where it is also historical. The French in West Africa had a different agenda, unlike the UK, and so they were more trying to control the West, those countries still, even after so-called independence. They were still trying to control them from overseas, from the French Parliament, from Paris, from wherever. And so if you're trying to control, you're obviously not going to open up the space for them to have civil society organizations who will in turn critique these same governments who are trying to control you. So that is what I largely see. I think a lot more work probably still needs to be done to look at the dichotomy of this challenge of Anglophone and Francophone civil society. But it largely is historical. I think I think a lot of those in Anglophone Africa would attest to the fact that the British have more open and inclusive and even more encouraging of establishing civil society organizations and identified ways, funding programs for many of them to be established in a way that's not happened in Francophone West Africa. And therefore, in Francophone West Africa, you've had more of a power play. The power play has been more intensified because it's been more remote control, remote controlling of the people and of the governments, largely of the governments, which obviously then trickles down to the people. So the people will accept largely what they see on radio and TV, which is filtered, remote controlled by France. But whereas in Ghana and Nigeria and the Anglophone West African countries, where there were also a lot of coups, those coups also brought a lot of reflections on what are we trying to do in creating countries that we can call our own, that we have governed ourselves. Because you find that in my country of Ghana, despite the fact that we were the first country to have independence in 1957, we have undergone a number of coups since 1957. Democracy finally stabilized in 1992. And those coups allowed a reflection by the leaders and the military on whether this is the route that they wanted to go. They actually wanted a more peaceful society where there was openness, there was inclusiveness, there was democracy. So yeah, I would likely point to that difference.
Yeah, would you draw a relationship between civil society presence, sensitization, understanding of the problems, understanding proposed solutions, and the sentiment that is in the streets of these three countries? It would appear the citizens, the ordinary citizens, are in support of everything that the current administrations in this country are doing, be it withdrawal from ECOWAS, be it leading a coup d'etat, be it changing the tone towards France. We know that it's difficult to draw it's difficult to kind of get an accurate sentiment of what is happening, but we do have the impression that the citizens are in support of the current administrations. What is your take on that?
Bernard, you're very right. The citizens appear to be largely in charge. Sorry, largely believing what the government is telling them. And for me, civil society, where civil society comes is that civil society serves as an important interface between truth and fiction. Civil society is usually in a place where it gathers the facts, it has researchers, it has people on the ground who can distill that information and present this information to the public using the media and other strategies to say, this is actually what the government is saying. This is what the government is doing. Actually, government ratifying, let's say the parliament ratifying a new election date in Senegal is a bad idea. The fact, for example, that you have Senegalese civil society taking the Senegal government to ECOWAS court because they turned off the internet speaks to the power of civil society. ECOWAS court has become an important human rights court in the sub-region and on the continent, a place where you do not have to exhaust national initiatives before you take it to the regional. So I was so joyous reading that Senegalese civil society had mustered the courage to take the Senegalese government with everything that seems to be hopeless about it to ECOWAS court to complain that it is an infringement of their rights. These are the kind of things that civil society is able to do and should do generally, serve as an interface between the truth and the reality that the government is portraying. So when you don't find that in countries, you're obviously going to find a lot of women and youth and ordinary people believing. Some of them, when you speak to ordinary people in these countries, some of them are very independent-minded. When they, especially the diaspora, you speak to them, those who are here, let's say in Ghana, working here, you realize that they are against what their government is doing, but they cannot convey this to they find that they're in a minority, largely because the absence of a civil society in these countries that are led by the junta will not allow them, will stymie and freeze their opinions. Because look, how is it possible that the junta, a country led by a junta, will encourage civil society? It's not possible because it's the military. The military does not want to be counteracted, second guessed. Whereas a democratic governance may be annoyed, but they will accept it because that's part of what democracy is all about. So I think the absence of governance, the absence of civil society, these are two things that have combined and come together to become a powerful force.
What would you say about arguments on the continent that Western powers use civil society organizations, fund civil society organizations to perpetrate the Western agenda as opposed to the needs of the people of the various African countries?
That's also very true. I mean, it was William Shakespeare who said that nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So when you have a problem, or when you have a solution, a perceived solution, that solution could either turn out for the worst or could turn out for the better. So yes, civil society, we've seen it countless times across the continent and even in the West. The society is often infiltrated, sometimes even by government, to make a point and to steer the direction and narratives of a country's history. And so sometimes you do see civil society infiltrated by people who want a particular agenda promoted. Yes, that has happened many times. We've seen it with the LGBTQ narratives and so on and so forth. And even on security and peace and governance things, you do find people who may promote something, views that are close to the government of the day, which was not always the best. So rather than an impartial view. So yes, civil society has been accused many times, and we see many cases where certain individuals have tried to infiltrate civil society by pushing their own views, which are pro-government or anti-government, to try and see how they can, change the narrative. But I think people are getting smarter. Civil society activists, researchers are getting a lot more smarter in identifying some of these weaknesses with civil society, and therefore building a more robust system to ensure that it is as minimized as possible. It is not that it will not continue to happen. It will continue to happen when civil society is infiltrated. You'll find people who want to push the government agenda out there, pushing it. You will always find those kind of things. But it is not as strong as it used to be.
Do we agree that the civil society and non-profit organizations have brought largely a positive contribution to African societies as compared to the narrative that is out there?
I believe that they have brought a positive narrative. I mean, I'm someone also who has worked with civil society before. I worked in civil society for 9.5 years, and I can attest to the role that civil society can play. We were, at the time that I was in civil society, back in 2004 to 2014, we were working against the economic partnership agreements that the EU was trying to impose on West Africa. There was a lot of work that we needed to do to make the point to government. The government of the day was pro the Western agenda. And so we saw certificates of emergencies being issued to make sure that things were passed before Parliament could debate it and all those things. But
I think we need to talk about
research.
I think sometime we need to organize a conversation about the economic partnerships and look exclusively at how these economic partnerships can advance African development and what we need to advance the development of Africa. Let's program that for another time. But now we have 4 countries in the West African bloc that are led by military governments. We have Mali, we have Niger, we have Burkina Faso, and we have Guinea. What explains the fact that of these 4, 3 withdrew from ECOWAS and 1 stayed in?
It's a bit of a mystery to me. Guinea-Conakry has always been an outlier if you think about the fact that Guinea-Conakry was one of the countries that actually said no to the French back in the 60s. And so the French left Guinea destroying almost everything in the country because they did not want to be colonized. They did not want to have the CFA, the currency. You can understand why Guinea may be an outlier. Guinea is also part of the West African Monetary Zone, which is which was set up in 2000, which is a sub-block within ECOWAS, which is Ghana, Guinea, Gambia, Liberia, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. So largely Anglophone countries, plus Guinea, whose primary objective was to set up the common currency of ECO and then join it with the CFA to become the ECO eventually. So we have an institution here in Ghana, which is the West African Monetary Institute, which has been here since 2001, which is supposed to be the West Africa Central Bank that would dispense the currency, the coins for the ECO once it was established. Unfortunately, the ECO has kept on, but Guinea has been part of the West African Monetary Zone, an Anglophone bloc within ECOWAS, and it's also been a country that has been largely independent for the longest time. I think Guinea appreciates what ECOWAS means to it, and I also think that it has not been as affected by the Sahel as these three countries have been. I'm not even sure that they are talking so much with Guinea. I'm sure you know that Guinea is not part of WEMWA, the West African Economic Monetary Union. So Guinea has always had this independent mind. If we can just go back to history, when Kwame Nkrumah set up the Guinea-Ghana-Mali Union in 1961, it was those three countries, Guinea, Ghana, Mali, Secretary, which speaks to almost these 50, 60 years ago, the independence of those three countries. So it's quite sad that Mali now has joined, the extremists who want to leave ECOWAS. But Guinea has always been a bit more measured and I want to believe that Guinea, in my estimation and monitoring of its role in ECOWAS, also has found that being in ECOWAS would benefit it more than leaving. And so it has stayed. I mean, Benin is also not really part of the Sahel, but Benin is also one of the Francophone countries. But Benin is doing very well with cotton, with a lot of things. It has transformed its economy under Talon. And it has stayed. It has not said that it wants to leave ECOWAS. It realizes that it has benefits in WEMWA, it has benefits in ECOWAS, and it is staying. I think these three countries have also had influences from Wagner Group, from the Russians and the Chinese. And I think the very fact that they're not led by democracies has also been a problem.
Let's talk about the external influence in a bit.
Yeah.
Let's look at the economic consequences of this withdrawal. Within ECOWAS, there is a free circulation of goods and services, which means that goods that arrive by sea can easily get to Mali, to Niger, to Burkina Faso, without unnecessary tariffs and customs along the borders. Because these countries do not have a maritime boundary, so they do not receive goods from abroad. Those goods must pass through other countries. How is this going to impact the economic situation of these three landlocked countries?
Thank you very much for that question. Very important question. And very important to highlight the fact that they're landlocked. I'm not surprised that they don't want to leave WEMWA. I'm not surprised that they don't want to leave WEMWA, the West African Economic Monetary Union, because they realize that they still need a buffer to be able to, they could probably use the ports of some of their WEMWA neighbors to be able to do business. But it's very easy to say that they want to leave ECOWAS. It's going to be messy. These two countries are part of the ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme, which is ECOWAS's landmark trade regime, because ECOWAS is both a free trade area and a customs union. It's been so since from 95 to 2000 going. And so as a free trade area / customs union, goods enter each of the ECOWAS countries tariff-free and quota-free. And the customs union means that there's only one external tariff, common external tariff for each of these member states. Now that these three say they want to leave, they are not going to be treated, obviously, as members of ECOWAS. They will have to be treated as foreigners. And when you're treated as foreigners / third parties, the common external tariff does not apply. Therefore, you're going to have to pay higher tariffs if you want to do business with the other 12 ECOWAS countries. You're going to have to pay a lot more on the ports. Everything is going to be doubled. Number one, your citizens who enjoy visa-free regimes can no longer hop on a plane and come to Ghana or go to Nigeria visa-free. They will now have to apply for visas to enter these countries because they're not part of ECOWAS. ECOWAS has been running a visa-free regime since 1979. So they will have to exit the visa-free regime. They'll have to exit the ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme. So they will no longer enjoy the free trade area / customs union, no longer freedom of movement. Some of the nationals of these three countries, frankly, and sadly, will have to be sacked from ECOWAS because many of them work in ECOWAS institutions across the sub-region. They will have to be sacked because, let's face it, they are no longer members of ECOWAS. What is their locus for working in ECOWAS institutions? So that diplomatic coverage will be out, but they're also no longer working. And those who are intermarried to each other will also have challenges. Imagine a husband who is Burkinabe, and his wife is, let's say, Nigerian. Now, the wife, they will have problems because the wife can travel, will be able to move freely across the sub-region and have a lot of benefits accrued to it. But the husband will no longer because the husband is no longer part of the ECOWAS community. These are very important and serious challenges that these countries are not thinking about, sadly. And I'm really hoping that there'll be more forums and reflections to ensure that some of these important points are brought out. It's a small thing, but it's quite big. Job losses are never easy.
Basically, we are saying that. Basically, we're saying that the citizens are going to have more economic difficulties because the cost of goods are definitely going to rise in these countries, and life is going to become more expensive. And are we sure that the governments are going to generate enough revenue to satisfy the social needs of the citizens, and investments are going to come into these countries following the recent shakeup in things?
I want to believe that even if they're going to generate goods, that will be in the long term. It's certainly not going to be in the short term, because what we are going to see is that the immediate withdrawal from ECOWAS is going to be turbulent. There's going to be a lot of logistical challenges that will come with it. And so whilst these three countries are looking at managing that for its nationals, they may not necessarily have the time to ensure that they're generating the needed revenue that they need to make sure that the country is running. Because a junta, I want to believe that a junta is not as organized as a democracy with the institutions that it has set up and so on. Democracy will have institutions where trade sector is talking to civil society, it's talking to whichever sector to ensure that certain things are done. The junta will be grandstanding, will be issuing decrees here and there. And I want to believe that because there's also an absence of civil society in our country, things are going to be a lot slower. So you're going to see that the lives of the ordinary people are going to be even worse with this withdrawal, because they're going to feel the heat and the challenges even more. The new Sahel grouping that they've set up, the Alliance of the Sahel States, has not been around long enough to generate the revenue that they want to see. I read and heard stories of people saying that they're going to set up a common currency called the Sahel. They have gold and they have all these. But these are things that will take time to James, it's not going to be 2 or 3 months. It's going to probably be 5 years before they start feeling benefits. I saw yesterday that there was there's news the Alliance of the Sahel States are setting up an airline for the Alliance of the Sahel States. That's impressive. But, it's very easy to quickly set up some of these things. Sustaining it is also an point. The beauty that democracy brings with the challenges, all the challenges that come with democracy, is the fact that there's inclusiveness, there's open, there's ability for people to make their points and stakeholder consultations and so on, issues of the day. A junta will not be welcoming to stakeholder conversations and narratives. That ought to make conversations a lot more open. And therefore, important points that need to be heard by the ordinary people from experts and activists cannot be heard because the junta will not allow that. So they're going to be in a lot more trouble than I think they will be. And I can tell you that it's going to be easy with the withdrawal. Let me give you an example. Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso has an institution called the West Africa Health Organization, which has been in Burkina Faso since 1987. The West Africa Health Organization is 30 in July. It will be 38 years old. 37 years old. It has been in Burkina Faso for 37 years. And that institution, once ECOWAS leaves, is now going to have to withdraw all its staff from Burkina Faso to now look for another ECOWAS country to set up and then move all that staff, and then move the staff and then fire the staff that are no longer ECOWAS nationals from it. You can imagine the chaos that will cause.
Following all these challenges, starting from the difficulty the citizens are going to face, the organizational shakeup in ECOWAS countries and former ECOWAS countries, the ECOWAS organization itself, do you think ECOWAS is going to let these 3 countries actually leave the bloc?
I want to believe that ECOWAS is doing its very best to talk to these 3 countries, to say that, look, the benefits of staying in ECOWAS is bigger than your exit. But it looks like they're also proving difficult and stubborn. Remember, these are military guys. They want to make a point. They are grandstanding. They're like, we are the guys. We are the ones who withdrew from ECOWAS. They're forgetting that there's a lot more to life than the military.
But could we say the ECOWAS itself has problems that need to be addressed, and these 3 countries are highlighting those problems, and this threat of withdrawal could actually push ECOWAS to cause internal reforms?
I think, I'm someone who believes that everything happens for a reason. And I think that the fact that this is happening in the 49th year before ECOWAS turns 50, it's good impetus for ECOWAS to reflect. Because ECOWAS has not been a perfect institution. It's had a lot of challenges. Sometimes the challenges have come largely from my train of thought. I want to believe that I've lost my train of thought. Tell me again.
Yeah, you're talking about internal challenges that ECOWAS is actually facing.
Yes, I think it's a good time for ECOWAS to reflect on what it needs to do ahead of its 50th anniversary, May 2025. So for me, the fact that this is happening is good because it'll cause ECOWAS to realize that things are not as rosy as it feels. ECOWAS has been a regional group that has had a lot of successes. And the literature across the continent and across the world shows that out of the regional groupings on the continent, ECOWAS is one of the success stories. So ECOWAS is a regional grouping certainly studied. However, it has also made a lot of mistakes and has had a lot of challenges. And for me, the biggest mistake stems from 2011. The fact that it did not anticipate the Sahel breaking up, nor the fact that it came up with the Sahel strategy on time and so on and so forth. So whilst it deals and it grapples with what is happening with three Sahel countries, I want to believe that they are going to do their very best and bring in their muscle and their heavyweight to talk to these three Sahel countries for them to refrain from leaving. I want to believe that is going to happen. And ECOWAS has some heavyweight presidents. In Obasanjo, for example, who is very well known in the international peace sector, conflict prevention resolution sector, as someone who has helped broker backdoor peace issues. I know Thabo Mbeki, who is not ECOWAS, of course, who's from South Africa, has also done that. So I want to believe that this is the time where ECOWAS will need to identify heavyweights within the sub-region who have weight, who carry weight, who can bring these countries together and say, look, guys, what you're doing is wrong. Obasanjo is a military man, but he has been also someone who has promoted democracy for the longest time and brokered peace many times over across the continent. And he is someone I want to believe may be brought on board with other presidents to say, look, guys, this is not the best way. You're going to disrupt a 50-year project. We've come so far. We're almost 50 years old. 5 decades is not small feat. And you're going to disrupt all that because you have challenges. You want to align with Russia or China. Come on, sit down, assess what you're going to lose when you leave ECOWAS. I want to believe that ECOWAS is compiling the pros and the cons of leaving ECOWAS now, though I doubt they will. Some of us as civil society people are doing that independently, but I want to believe that there will be people in different corners who will be making sure that these three countries understand what they are going to lose when they leave the country. When we are together and united, we are stronger. In 2014, ECOWAS GDP, the GDP of these 15 countries, according to the IMF, was $720 billion. This was in 2014. In 2015, when ECOWAS celebrated 40 years of its existence, ECOWAS was counted as the 16th largest economy in the world. 16th, 1/6, which tells you how important ECOWAS is in the conversation on Africa's development. So we need to save it from disintegrating, and I think we need to do it very quickly.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about the possible external influences that must have pushed these three countries to withdraw from ECOWAS. First of all, we hear a lot about French influence, for the French deciding everything that's happening in the Sahel in ECOWAS. Some people accuse ECOWAS of bending the knee to the French at all times. Some people say Russia and China are pushing these three countries to put up this resistance against the French-led ECOWAS institution, according to what they say. What is your take on this? Where do you stand, and what is the next step that people need to understand about Western influence in these institutions?
I want to believe that Western influence is always going to be a part of, it's going to be the narrative on the continent in the international system. It'll always be there. We don't have permanent friends. As someone once said, we have permanent allies. So it's even among themselves, even the West themselves see themselves as allies and not necessarily friends. So I want to believe that these influences are something that we must control. We're not going to stop them. We must simply control them. And it would be a shame that an institution like ECOWAS has been influenced by these three countries, by the Russians and the Chinese. The Russians and the Chinese have tried to influence ECOWAS many times with troops and so many other things. Even the African Union, we see it. The fact that the Chinese built the new African Union that has been around since 2012. But despite that, the African Union has sought to make independent decisions and choices on what it needs to do to make the continent grow. So please let these interferences be there. What matters is how we as African countries are able to come together to have strategies to contain and mitigate these influences, because Russia's Wagner Group will be around for a long time. We cannot kill it, we cannot stop it, but we need to manage how we deal with them. But what you also notice is that they are very interested in going to countries which governance is very weak. So I think one way of mitigating this is making sure that we improve the good governance in our countries, and then ECOWAS pushes more strongly than ever on ensuring that good governance is stressed according to the ECOWAS protocol of good governance.
But
that it is as much as possible.
Those who are accusing external factors or external players put this on the money question. The ECOWAS countries, the ECOWAS leaders may not necessarily raise the amount of money they need to carry out their policies. So the Western influence, the Eastern influence, the Russian influence, the Chinese influence comes in with money that dictates the policy. So how can the ECOWAS countries or the former ECOWAS countries withstand the pressures from these powers when they do not have the necessary money and other resources to execute their policies, like the fight against terrorism in the Sahel?
You see, let me break it down this way. You see, as ordinary individuals, there's a time when we have a lot of money on us, and there are times when we don't have money. When we don't have money, we go to a bank for a loan. And if we cannot find a bank, we may ask friends and relatives. When we don't, as much as we need money, the worst that we will do when we are broke is we will go to friends and relatives to help us with money, to support us on certain things. Very rarely are we going to find us going to the mafia or going to any mafia to go and get a loan from them when we are broke. Why? Why is that? Because we know the consequences of going to the Russian mafia or the Italian mafia when we are broke. The kind of wahala that you will get, you will regret. So there's a certain level of intelligence that you apply when you don't have resources. You manage what you have, and what you can't, you can it. So yes, a lot of African countries are broke. They don't have money, resources to do certain things, but not all of them will go to Russia or to China. And it also depends on how you talk to Russia and China. Do you talk to them as benefactors or as partners? Rwanda has been a country that has done very well in talking to Western countries as partners rather than as benefactors. And it's transformed this country. I want to believe that we can do the same in Mali, Burkina Faso, where we talk to the Russians and the Chinese as partners rather than as benefactors who are just pouring money, giving us money to do whatever we want to do.
It appears the battle here is not between the communication between the African countries and the Russians, or the African countries and the West. The battle is behind the scenes between the West, Russia, and China. The African side is just the playground. So do you think the weight of the conversation is actually in the hands of the Africans in this case?
I want to believe it still is in the hands of the Africans. Look, the ECOWAS has come a long way. The African Union has come a long way for the fact that the African Union is now in the G20, thanks to the intervention of India in pushing this to happen. African countries, when they come together, are a powerful force to reckon with. That's 55 countries. As regional blocks in the different groupings that we belong, we are able collectively to make impact when we decide that we have to come together. So yes, whilst Africa is still the playground of the West, the Russians, and so on, I still want to believe that if we have indigenous strategies for ECOWAS, for COMESA, for SADC, for ECAS, for CEMAC, and all these other regional groupings on how we protect our natural resources, how we protect our minerals, how we protect things that will make our countries grow, and deal with some of these countries as partners, we will make a lot more progress than just allowing them to, or trying to kill any attempts. Let's not forget, let's not worry about the fact that they want to, they have their own designs for the continent. That will always happen. People always have their design. But
I
what
do
matters
understand.
is how you manage to contain those designs with strategies.
I do understand the idea, the idealistic part of it, what we want to do. That is what all of us want. That is how we all want Africa to be and to look like.
Yes.
But then the real part of it is, why have these 54 countries not stuck together in shaping the policy, whether it be it at the regional bloc level or at the continental level? Why has that sticking together not happened all along for the last 60 or so years?
Let's remember that, and this is the point someone made yesterday in the WhatsApp group, that unlike the European Union is a supranational institution, which is to say that the decisions of the European Union are filtered to member states and apply to the member states, whereas the African Union is an intergovernmental union. It's a union of governments who come together at the AU summits and wherever else. However, this is where our RECs come in, the regional economic communities, because ECOWAS is a supranational group. The decisions that are made at ECOWAS are adopted at the national level in Ghana, in Nigeria, and wherever else. In 1993, when ECOWAS revised its treaty after the civil war in Liberia, they decided that they amended it to the extent that the decisions of ECOWAS are part of our sovereignty. Each member state of ECOWAS' sovereignty would belong to ECOWAS. So the decisions taken at the ECOWAS level would have to be translated, would have to be enforced at the national level. And I think that has been one of the things that has helped ECOWAS come this far in its 49 years of existence. Yes, we do not always have a concerted approach at the AU level or at the ECOWAS level. And sometimes it is just member states being recalcitrant, being stubborn, having their own agendas, either because power is too sweet or otherwise. But I think that's changing. Like I said, the work that I do at the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, the AU's agency responsible for promoting good governance. And they have 44 countries that have now acceded to have their countries peer reviewed. The latest one being in DRC. And so you will find that these are countries whose hands have not been tied that come and examine my country. They have themselves have said that I want you as the AU to come and look at my country, how it's doing by way of good governance, tell me things that I can improve. And they're looking at other countries, what they have done well and so on. So the African Peer Review Mechanism is an important reminder to the world, because that the African Union can do something good on its own, because the system of the Africa Peer Review is unlike the EU. There's none like it in the EU. There's none like it in the Southern Africa, Southern America, or the US. It is member states saying that we want to be peer reviewed. We want the AU to come into our countries and take a look at what is going on and give us recommendations of what we can do better. And it has been working since we celebrated 20 years of the APRM in December in Joburg. I can tell you that they're going to now hire a new CEO, which will be adopted at the AU Summit in February this month, next week or so. And we're going to see a lot more changes, and we want to see more countries join the APRM, helping promote the good governance on the continent that we have seen. So the APRM has made tremendous efforts in helping promote the good governance that we need to see on the continent. And the APRM is an example that the AU can work when it gets a good leader who wants to see the African Union work and who wants to see leaders of the continent actually coming together to make things work. So I think we're on the right track, but we need a lot more visibility. We need to align a lot of these things all together. We need to have more meetings and more interviews like this to let the world know what is going on in these institutions, so that people can be encouraged that the Africa is on track. The Agenda 2063, for example, that we are talking about, it is a continental blueprint for the continent. a lot of people know more about the SDGs and the Agenda 2063, but some of us are trying to change that, to let them know that if you know the UN's SDGs, you must know what all the aspirations of Agenda 2063, because they are what our children and our grandchildren are going to face when we leave the world. So I think things are on track, Bernard, and I think it's not all doom and gloom. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done in the RECs, the regional economic communities like ECOWAS, and also the African Union. But I think a combination of the RECs working with the AU and the UN is what will help create a more stable and peaceful world that we need.
Thank you so much for highlighting the importance of conversations like this. We conceived this program Beyond Africa to bring down the conversations to those who actually are key players in the field, but may not necessarily have the resources or the microphone of established media. And we make our content readily available to every listener. We are building. And the key driver of this platform is the fact that Africans who leave Africa are not making Africa to suffer from brain drain. It is rather a brain gain, because once you're out there, you gain knowledge, you gain resources, you gain experience, you gain networks that you can bring back to the continent to help advance the continent. And our primary goal is to ensure that Africa is actually moving forward, is actually developing. And this is captured by the type of conversations we have. Our conversation is focused on the future of ECOWAS. Our conversation is focused on the effects that the withdrawal is going to have on the citizens of these countries. And our conversation is also looking at the possibilities of reforming ECOWAS and consequently all other regional blocs to serve African interests, And this cannot happen unless Africans themselves are taking the lead, unless we decide to put our resources, our skills, our networks, and our experiences into developing our own continent. We won't be able to understand the policies that are already in place. How did those policies come about? How important are those policies? And how will these policies help the continent advance? What needs to change in these policies? We cannot have high-level policies and then the citizens don't know these policies. If the citizens are not aware of these policies, what is going to happen is more coup d'etat, more withdrawals from regional blocs, the death of democracy, the death of conversations like this. So we need to actually talk amongst ourselves and look for solutions to our problems in Africa.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I appreciate the opportunity to come on your program to talk.
Thank you so much, Ngalim Bensah. It's been a pleasure talking to you and getting your insights from the perspective of someone who understands how ECOWAS works, who's worked with the AU's policy system, and who can advise or tell us where the withdrawals from ECOWAS is going to, what we need to do, and how we need to do those things. At this point, thank you so much for coming. And dear viewers, dear listeners, thank you so much for joining us. We are building the platform. Kindly share the content with others and encourage your friends, your family, your schoolmates, your colleagues to share, enjoy the content as we grow. We are definitely going to be coming back with more engaging content from people who know how the continent is operating and who can actually share their knowledge and insight with us. As you heard from Emmanuel, there is a lot going on, and we have different topics on which we can have more conversations about this, and we're definitely going to have it. We need to know what is happening on the continent, and that is going to help us move the continent grow. Thank you so much for coming, Emmanuel.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Bernard. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, and see you next time. This was Beyond Africa with Ngalim Bernard.